It's okay that we're kind of working up to an understanding, climbing to an understanding, if you will, of what we could possibly realize, how other people have their own levels of in the know. Levels of in the know. Like, it's for example, you could possibly not understand that I understand. And what I understand is my fluidity of my life, not just human. We all have a soul part that we neglect. And that soul part, neglection part, that's the quote unquote thing, the most thing, quote unquote, that gets us most into quote unquote trouble, end quote. And what I mean by that is the product of our circumstances is based on the different levels of reciprocation and transactions from niche contracts before birth, or just casually going within this earth reality or earth realm. Because someone could ask, like, why, like, how did my life get like this, whether it's good, bad, or somewhere of the combination, right? And within the good, bad, and the somewhere of the combination, the life itself, it could possibly have a maintenance of some type of positive balance, right? So within that positive balance, who maintains that positive balance, that could still face something of a quote unquote opposition, end quote. And that opposition could be someone in a particular circumstance where it's not necessarily favorable, and everybody's life is case by case. Because people's lives are a product of the different transactions that they're making with different agencies, for one example, or just different beings, more on a casual vast level. So particular beings before the quote unquote human life, end quote, there's a transaction reciprocation process, quote unquote contract, end quote, that's being had. So some people could have project unwarranted hate upon someone else, but them not necessarily realizing it. Your life is your responsibility, metaphysically speaking. And what I mean by metaphysically speaking, your life is your responsibility. You quote unquote sold out to what you sold out to, end quote. You did what you done, right? Like on just a past like level. And within what you did, what you done, all the spiritual new age truths are fine and dandy. But the thing that particularly precisely has to be balanced is the ongoing accountability, the maintaining the balance and the responsibility and the accountability. Because obviously all those truths are half truths unless it's actually maintained with like spiritual maturity, accountability, and responsibility. If you don't have spiritual maturity, accountability, and responsibility, then any one of these new age truths, quote unquote, end quote, it's just a half truth, which is an incomplete truth, which is energetically, quote unquote, false, end quote. So the half truth isn't the full truth, because you still have to, without the verbalization or the rhetoric of it, you're still having to maintain your metaphysical accountability, and your human is a consolidated reflection of that metaphysical kind of like different zone of free will. And from that zone of metaphysical free will, you ultimately perched up and perked up your human life. You perched up your physical life based on different, accumulative transactions that are being made with ultimately different beings at a depth we can't fathom, ultimately to maintain what we are to go towards an external front. Because for the soul, for however it got created and originated and conceived, for it to go to this human life, it had to go through multiple different processes, through multiple different layers. Because being a human, it's a gift that we're taking for granted. It's an advanced gift, and within that advanced gift, we're kind of, it's the trick is not to sell out to certain detrimental shadows. And not all shadows are bad, because it's just how you're using a certain energy, to put it simply. And when you're doing that, if we can't have the distinction between how there's like a deconstructive use of the shadow and a constructive use of the shadow, and we're following into the deconstructive line, then we're doing we're doing energetic business on faulty premises. And within the faulty premises of the quote unquote energetic business, end quote, which is already a thing, is like, it's like, what are you really agreeing to? And whatever the thing that you're agreeing to, what is its background schematics of its levels of non-distortion, or its unconscious knowing, or its unconscious use of distortion. And unconscious use of distortion is something that's like you don't necessarily know about it until like a particular insight is given to that unconsciousness, a particular light is given to that unconsciousness. And how something could be distorted is how just, how a detrimental creation could be used in a detrimental way. A quote unquote rough definition for distortion, end quote. And there's energies behind that quote unquote distortion, end quote. And if we can't have the distinction to see what are the energies of distortion, then you're going to get confused with positive darkness, with whatever, distortion is, which are two completely different things. Shout out to the predecessors. And within those two different things, we could quote unquote possibly fall victim, end quote, to like something that's of detriment. And if we can't have the distinction to actually know what that is, then our life, slowly but surely, unconsciously and gradually, there's possibilities of us falling out of a particular balance, for us to ultimately be intermeshed unconsciously into some type of portion of distortion, quote unquote, end quote. And within that, that's making the circumstance of our life, we're falling out of a certain maintenance of balance. And as we're falling out of a certain maintenance of balance, we have to be spiritually wise and spiritually intelligent to actually have the distinction to see what is non-distortion and what is distortion in anything. Because if we don't, then we're quote unquote susceptible to that influence, to like have more false influence over what we are and how we could be balanced or lose that balance, metaphysically speaking, of course, or spiritually speaking, of course, originally though. So within that already happening, we could ask ourselves like, okay, why is my life hard? Like pause. Like we understand the pause concept. That's like 20 years old, right? Or whatever. But anyways, like pause for like the wisdom to fill you, respectively. And the particular wisdom that wants to be filled within the possible empty space that's hopefully like receptive to some type of nurturing or nourishment. Within that within us being able to pause, it's like we could see like we could see how we could stay on track, We're seeing the different types of contracts in the background level and the surface level. And the surface level is just a mere minor depiction of it, because we could ask ourselves, why is my life like this? Pause. I say the pause because there's a particular spiritual emphasis that needs to be had. We're pausing, we're neutrally, gracefully seeing the life check, right? What is the life check? We're falling out of our spiritual maintenance and balance. And as we do that, we could not take accountability. And as we not take accountability, we could be like, we could have unwarranted, like, kind of like, and this is like a low-key understatement, we could have false projections upon another. We could be in this blame energy when really it's our responsibility on a deep metaphysical level, because you're ultimately selling out towards a certain being and you're fulfilling the contract with a certain being. So ultimately, metaphysically, everything that you ever are is your responsibility, because those are the contracts you're undergoing and fulfilling on a metaphysical level, on an original spiritual level. So within that original spiritual level, every moment we have a chance to nudge to actually fix that, but we're too prideful, There's like, people have their own level of, unique awkwardness. They don't want to, the ego gets in the way of like, do you really want to fix your situation? Not like, no, because there's a unique ego there. You know, the unique ego, it like, for some reason, the shadow of pride, it's ashamed to ask for help sometimes. And that's what the shadow of pride. And if you didn't peep that one, then, you know, maybe, you know, in the future, you might just figure that one out, you know, because people don't understand what someone else could understand, because we have just, the ego is just like in a unique way. It's in its own unique version in this present day of how it is all over the place. You know, it could think it knows everything. It doesn't want to ask for help. It thinks it's like, you know, the head fucking honcho or whatever. But we don't understand that nature's testing us, and the nature is going to be the one, whether I say it or not, nature's going to be the one, you know, possibly checking us. And I'm just saying shit is as it is, you know. I'm not trying to like, I'm just being neutral. I'm not trying to like cap on anybody. This is just the truth for a different, higher liberation. The higher liberation is exercising expression, a type of liberation, and within that expression, going towards liberation and pulling liberation down. So a different, higher liberation could be possibly grounded and quote unquote anchored into the reality, end quote. Shout out to my 2017 shit. But anyways, and obviously edit that out, because that's not necessarily like, you know, needed to say. But I'm just saying, like, we don't want to take accountability, and if we don't take accountability, we could complain and we could project our situation upon someone else. But you have to peep your own, or you have to listen to your own circumstance. That's the thing. It's like do you know like what you're selling out to, what you're quote unquote involved with, end quote, and on a different level, on the quote unquote past life, end quote, meaning the past life being something of like possibly a dream world or whatever. When you go to sleep, you're going somewhere, but you forget. In the human realm, we're passing through the simulation when we dream, you know, casually, neutrally. And within saying that, we're ultimately like signing up and voting energetically for what we want to uphold based on where we're at in our spiritual evolution and our spiritual understanding. Because in the end, you like, I'm just trying to like break down like why it's important to like take accountability, and within taking accountability, you could take back your unwarranted quote unquote toxic projections, end quote, upon another person, because your situation is your responsibility, and it's up to you to ultimately nudge how you could change it and what you want to energetically vote for based on recognizing the different contracts with the different beings you're within, whether it's recognizable and obvious or not. And that evidence will unravel for the human realm, and your human will grow up to possibly energetically vote for a better balanced outcome. And if it doesn't, then you're resonating and associating with non-balance and quote unquote energies and actions and quote unquote beings, end quote, that lean towards some type of quote unquote distortion, end quote. So your whole fucking life, respectively, is your own spiritual accountability, and toxic projections upon another that you have, it's unwarranted, because ultimately you are responsible of your circumstance based on the different transactions that you're reciprocating with other beings that aren't necessarily for spiritual balance and maintaining that. So there's a big line in the sand being drawn on the cosmic ocean and the cosmic beach. There's one big line in the sand being drawn. Is it for big balance or not? That's as simple as it gets. And if you want to shit on this simplicity, that's okay. It's just like, that's your relationship with, that's where you're at with the universe. And I'm just saying that on a neutral level, because like obviously people could try to like, you know, for whatever fucking, you know, reason, for wherever they're at, and I'm trying to be kind and graceful, they could attempt to shit on me based on their disunderstanding or whatever the fuck they are, however they ended up, whatever they're associating with, because how their emotional temperament is based on the people that they're ultimately associating with, and what they want to, how they want to associate with just certain fractions of division on the earth plane, physical plane. That's what they're nudging towards. That's what they're resonating. Because what I'm trying to simplify here is your life is your responsibility. And if you don't like your life, it's because your ego and your detrimental ego and pride got the best of you because you're okay working with fragmented contracts that with beings that are leaning towards some type of quote unquote distortion, end quote. So the projections are unwarranted that are toxic upon another person because you're energetically ultimately voting to associate with certain beings that are ultimately in that flavor, and you more or less are, as you grow up into your life, unravel into this life as you keep growing, you are more or less going to gain awareness and intelligence, seeing that that's a self-evident kind of fact that certain beings are just having a certain system, and that certain system is for a detrimental fragmented way. And what detrimental fragmented way is, it's not original spiritual balance, respectively. And since it's not original spiritual balance, people in between that they could just be like, they could just be kind of fanciful and elusive, and even like, still leaning towards some delusionalness, because the source is the foundation, and the foundation of it on a deeper level is the source to, like, before all of this, like, inner passing type of shit, quote unquote, playing the innocent card, but not necessarily being innocent, end quote, most respectively. Because I'm just seeing what the mature esoteric psychology is. And there's this one video I kind of like, I haphazardly say some people's quote unquote psychology is garbage, end quote. I said that post a video because before I said that on an underground video, I actually did a whole different presentation that actually particularly explains particularly why. So sometimes on the online external videos, I'll say things, but there'll be details left out. But like, so there'll be a day where like I could actually explain, there's actually a balanced reasoning why that was said, like, that you wouldn't necessarily guess. Because honestly, anybody could like, dissect and break down my shit, anybody's shit, no shit. The human brain, or the human being, has been doing that since like, since forever, right? So within doing that, like, it's not necessarily a surprise to me, I'm not necessarily surprised. Because these are just human psychological patterns of how we're trying to figure out what we're in, what nature is, what God is, what philosophy is. And within that, we're in the science experiment of our own life upon doing that. Hence, the collective intelligence of the present moment. So within the collective intelligence of the present moment, it's harnessing both the balance and the non-balance. And you could say that's Mother Nature or Father Nature or both, or and there's secret original lineages behind all the gods, and all the gods come from that. And then, all the gods are, different from the original divine father and mother source. And from that, the gods, they have the post lineages in contrast to the original, universal father and mother, most respectively. And within saying all of that, how you're judging nature, that's how nature is ultimately like gonna be judging you, because we're processing and downloading big truths of like, we're dedicating ourselves. Some of the predecessors are telling us to dedicate ourselves to some type of balanced approach, clarified approach to the real all is oneness or whatever like that. But within that, there's so many quote unquote, tedious technicalities that, certain guides and predecessors don't necessarily profess, because they lean towards, going into a detrimental, fragmented, quote unquote, selfish, end quote, type of path. That path of esoteric unbalance gets the best of the beings. So it doesn't really matter what the beings are. That at the end of the day, because of that principle, the titles don't even necessarily mean things, because you're not going to lie to the original universe at that original level of if you are for real spiritual balance or not. Even the title and the being is like kind of not even exempt from the universal balance, respectively, because that's how advanced, the universe is, So it's like, how advanced is the universe? Well, we would have to see how it's like really maintaining balance and organization. So even the post lineages, that's the physical world. Welcome to the physical world. And within that physical world, we could see like its own trail that it's left, and the trail that it's left is like, okay, the human psychology within the last 2,000 years, this is the recent creation and experiment. And it's like, the how people are like trying to solve things and figure out things, that's not necessarily new, but it's new in the version of the time that we're in. We're painting it a new way based on the tools and the new creativity aspects that is ultimately like new per the time, but the method itself, the methodology of just decoding and trying to like, naturally, organize things for your own unique self, that's not new. That particular methodology isn't new. So I'm just trying to see like the a new shared intelligence. It's here to say like the sovereignty is more advanced than we think. It's a sovereignty in intellectualism and your unique sovereignty, sovereignty, because, the predecessors, they like, we have to have distinction between the predecessors, and the predecessors are on a physical level. It's the balance beings secret in the secret physical level, and then the adversaries of the balance beings on the physical level, because even the quote unquote enemy is the teacher, end quote. But in my original insight is saying like only confusion is the enemy, and just like, no, you're placed with whatever you think God is, because I think God is the universe, right? But we're like, we have our own subjective idea, our own confused idea of what we think God is, which isn't like necessarily a thing. And then there's like, I guess you could say like the spiritual predecessors, right? So those predecessors, they want us to more or less possibly know what quote unquote sovereignty is, end quote. And there's different sovereignties. It's a sovereignty of the soul. But we're not, for the most physical humans within their quote unquote, just condition of like fragmentation and confusion and delusionalism with it, that's painted and puffed up into their human vessel, unquote. They don't necessarily know what original sovereignty is, because it's not necessarily like the insight isn't distributed and the guidance isn't distributed, because the contrast is extreme. We're coming out of it, who was to say if it was God's decision that we're coming out of this big age of darkness, and within that big age of darkness, that was a unique, just a unique window in time of what the experiment was hidden for. And what the experiment was hidden for is, if there is light, by default there will be darkness. And if there is light and there's darkness, a certain collective roller coaster vehicle could go from a particular balanced field of light to non-balanced field of light, and then it could go towards a particular balanced field of darkness, and also as well a particular balance or a particular non-balance of darkness. So it's going through all of those phases, and as it's going through all those phases, God could be like seeing the ship go naturally, quote unquote can't stop it, or maybe he can, but naturally he lets it ride some type of admin cadmin body on some level, some solar system or galaxy. A unique galaxy is going through an energetic metaphysical temperament of darkness, going out of balance or not balance, and we're coming out of the not balance. We're barely creeping out of the come up of a non-balance of darkness. So I understand how certain beings could have all these different like unique psychologies, these unique inclinations, these unique patterns, these unique behaviors. Like it's not necessarily a surprise to me. I understand the field that we're coming out of. The field that we're coming out of, a particular field of darkness, gave rise to particular beings surviving how they were survived, and within their survival challenge, they adapted certain psychological patterns and ways of being based on the metaphysical field that we're in. And the metaphysical field that we're in, we're coming out of that, and it's up to ourselves to balance ourselves with a higher quote unquote universal council, end quote, to see how we could balance ourselves from that field and perhaps maintain ourselves from that field and perhaps even like have the collective counsel to protect us from any type of detriment, generally speaking. And it like, could your AI do that? Could it be that advanced? Thank you guys.